Hi everybody, welcome to the Distributed SQL Summit 2022. And this is going to be a very exciting session. I have with me Tom, a good friend, really from the app background from Fiserv. And we're going to be talking all things application development. But before we get started, Tom, do you mind doing an intro? Do you mind telling the audience about your background?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So my name again is Tom Eck. I'm the Senior Vice President of Digital Transformation at Fiserv. And really what I look after is a couple of things. So I have a very elite team, dev team that reports to me, and we call ourselves tip of the spear. And what we mean by that is we're kind of the first ones to get access to like the more modern platforms, more modern methodologies, and then kind of the nouveau type of apps that are being developed in the payments and financial services space. So that's what I look after.
Fantastic. So it's going to be a really, really incredible conversation. Okay, so we're here to talk about distributed SQL, but before that, let's get your opinion on what is all this stuff about digitization or going digital native or all this stuff, right? What does it really mean?
Yeah, so to me, digital transformation encompasses a lot of things, and included in that is cloud transformation. So I think that's a part of it. But to me, digital transformation is much broader, and only part of it is the technology. So certainly we need to start relying on more modern platforms, such as Yugabyte and other types of container management platforms, and of course the public cloud. But I think it goes far broader than that. I think to get the most juice out of the squeeze, we really also need to address things like culture and mindset and methodology. So I typically say that in any kind of technology problem or technology challenge or technology project, whatever it might be, I think the tech itself is about 25% of the challenge. And I think getting everything else right is really hard. And, you got things like the inertia of this is the way we do it.
I know this, I don't want to change it.
Right, right. So how do we kind of get past that? Then you might have like an organization the size of mine, you have different business units, sometimes operate in silos, sometimes we don't get complete alignment. So in addition to all of the other technical things we're trying to do, we have to get those things right at the same time.
Got it. So I think all of those are great topics to talk about, right? So maybe let's start with the application development itself, right? Like, how do you see it? How do you see it changing? How would you say, the tip of the spear team, right? Like, how do you guys see it change? And what are you gravitating towards? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I operate my team quite differently, I think, from most of the other teams at Fiserv. So I am completely into Agile Scrum.
Okay.
So I have a very flat organization, and really the way I think about my team is in terms of the individual Scrum team. So typical kind of Scrum team of about 8 engineers, QA testers, designers. One thing that's unique about my team is I actually have a small design agency embedded in my team.
Fantastic, right? Because good design is super important.
Right.
Yeah.
I also happen to have product in my team. So I don't have kind of that traditional back and forth between engineering and product. So we're really self-sufficient. And although we're small, we're mighty. And I think that's attributed to, let's say, 3 things, right? First of all, really good talent, right? And people that can really work together as a team. Okay, that's essential. Second thing is, as I said before, access to the most modern technologies. That just helps us go faster. Yeah. And then the methodology, right? So I do 2-week sprints, and during sprint planning, I enforce that this is a commitment that the team is making.
Yep.
And at the end of the 2-week sprint, you have to basically show your work and explain if you missed the mark, what went wrong, what could you do better next time, and then actually demonstrate what you coded. But over all of that, what I think has been really one of the greatest force multipliers is automation and patterns. And that's what I'm focusing a lot on. And I guess the last thing would be self-service. So developers need as much self-service as possible. In fact, I had let's just say a disagreement a few years ago with a product person regarding a developer portal we were building. And this individual insisted that we have a 1-800 number at the bottom of our homepage, right? And I go, no, I think if somebody feels they have to pick up the phone and call us, we might have failed.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's the intent. 3 a.m. developer, should be able to do anything they need to do to be proficient.
Fantastic. So, like maybe let's zoom out on the business a little bit, right? Can you talk about what Fiserv does, just so the audience has an idea, and then come to I mean, I know Fiserv is a data-first company, right? Like, what does it mean to be data-first with what you just explained, right? Which is you're moving fast, you're building, you have Scrum teams, you have very agile development, all of that going on, but you still need to be data-first, which requires some planning, something, right? Like, so can you talk about that balance? But maybe just start with what does Fiserv do?
Yeah, so Fiserv, as we call ourselves anyway, is the world's largest fintech. So we move money. That's what we're in the business of doing, and we move about, let's call it 1.5 trillion US dollars per year.
Oh man!
And we're talking during kind of peak loads. That's like 4,000 or more card swipes per second, right?
Wow!
So that's from the first data side of the business, which was a company that I had worked for and then got acquired by Fiserv. Mm-hmm. What Fiserv proper delivers is core banking software. And we just made a big investment and purchased a cloud-native, API-first core banking system. Now, with all of these transactions that we process and all the banking transactions, et cetera, it throws off a lot of data exhaust, right? Mm-hmm. And I think we're at the point where we're looking for ways to monetize our data. And I think what's really going to become important about that is kind of data rights at the consumer level.
Yeah.
And we see that going on in Europe and in other places around the world with things like PSD2.
Yeah.
So I think that's going to be very essential that we get that right. I would say that we are in kind of early stages of getting our data monetization program in place. I think the biggest way that we've been leveraging AI, ML with data has been on the fraud space, as well as understanding consumer behavior, for example, giving them the next best offer or something like that, and also giving the merchant analytics. So we have a product where, let's say you own some pizza shops and you're looking to open up a new one, but you want to find out what is the best location, right?
Yeah.
So we can provide data on foot traffic, just based on card swipes from other
location. Oh, great! That's
right.
Those
Those kind of things, right? And then we can do other things that help our merchants. Like we can even bring in weather data, and we can say we notice that on inclement days, your foot traffic is less. So you might change your employee roster for that day. You might switch things up. But I think we're going to see an explosion this year and next year in the data products that we specifically offer.
Fantastic. So that means all the way from having a robust transactional system to planning for scale and to the flexibility of what people are doing, to analytics and insights, to augmenting and enriching data. There's a lot of this stuff, right? How do you look at that and think of that in comparison with the actual the 2-week Scrum cycles, what the product, it's like what people are building, how they're building, the design patterns as you called it, right? You don't want to keep reinventing them. How do you think of these two next to each other? So that's got to be a challenge. Right?
It's a challenge, and it's something we have to get right. But once we get it right, I think it becomes these become force multipliers. So we're developing patterns for app developers to securely, efficiently build, let's say, microservices. Let's take that as a pattern. Uh-huh. So, we're deploying on modern container management platforms, and we're, starting to code more and more in a cloud-native way. Mm-hmm. Now, I like to say, I made these numbers up. They're probably not accurate, but maybe they're in the right zip code. I would say if you have a developer force of, let's say, 1,000 people, right? Mm-hmm. I would say maybe of those, maybe 100 of them can accurately describe a 12-factor app or a microservice, right?
Yeah.
Maybe only 50 of them have ever written a microservice.
Yep.
And maybe 3 of them are really experts at it.
Yep.
So how do we take the expertise of those, fictitious 3 people,
and then
right?
Spread it, yeah.
Right. So we need to codify it some way. So, just like everything else, let's, it should be like intellect as code. Yes. I just made that up.
Yes, no, it makes sense.
Right?
Yes, makes total sense.
Right. So how can we do that? And we need to bring into the discussion when we build these patterns, not just people like me that are in charge of app development, but we need to bring security, compliance, regulatory, all these folks together at once so that we have the right guardrails in place. And I think that makes developer productivity, not just really increases the speed that they can build apps because some of the framework and scaffolding is there, but they don't have to be concerned about things like security. And then once we put them in a kind of a sandbox with the right guardrails around it, then hopefully they can't shoot themselves in the foot, or alleviate that concern that they might, and let them just focus on doing building the business logic.
Makes sense. So in the context of all of this, like how does a distributed SQL database, like say Yugabyte DB, how does that factor into all of this?
Right. So I'm a big platform guy, right? So I see the world of technology as platforms that are exposing services that I need, but I don't want to, or I can't build myself. And I expect they to act like dial tone, right? So we need the database engineering team to basically look at a distributed SQL platform, as a service to the developers, right? So I focus more at the Java level, let's say. So I really rely on our database folks to become experts and working with professional services such as yours at Yugabyte, to get all that right. And I noticed that kind of in your roadmap, you are starting to focus more and more on developer productivity, and, right, helping developers out, because a lot of them also don't understand kind of the nuances of what a distributed database, right? What are the implications? They might just be accustomed to doing, single node,
a certain way,
right? So how do we also bring that knowledge into these patterns or these templates, so they don't get it wrong, the app developers don't get it wrong, and I think one of the key challenges that we need to face is that we have traditional DBAs, which make sure the indexes are tuned and the backups and those kind of things, right? Then we have the app developers who really don't have that expertise to maybe understand the difference between different indexes and using views or what they should be using. So there needs to be a role that I think sits between those, almost like a DB programmer or DB engineer. I don't know, some term like that. And then again, let's get the knowledge that's in those people's heads and get them into a pattern. So I would love to be able to have, for example, a pattern that says you want a microservice that talks to a database, and maybe there's an option that says you want NoSQL or you want relational, and then we can just automatically wire that up into the appropriate Yugabyte instance, for example.
Makes sense. Yeah, makes total sense. There's this term that we're started floating around, which is getting good uptick. We call it DevSec Data Ops. All right, so it's DevOps, and there was DevSecOps, right? Now we're saying it's DevDataSecOps.
I had the same idea.
Okay.
I completely agree with you. Yeah, I think kind of collapsing or at least making all those disciplines kind of tighter and in the same boat together. I think there's so many advantages that there is to that, right?
Absolutely,
And a lot of it is, we want to get rid of kind of things like miscommunications, finger pointing, misunderstandings.
Or even reinventing the wheel. I mean,
right, or reinventing the wheel.
Make the same mistakes over and
right.
reach a good spot,
Yeah, so back to my, organization, I think that's, so my team moves very, very fast. And I have, my peers and others ask, how is it that you can get all this done so quickly? You have a pretty small team, relatively speaking, as some of my peers. And, and I told them just what I had said before about kind of those principles. So part of my job is to, tip of the spear, I think also means that I'm responsible for establishing these kind of new procedures and policies and mindsets for the rest of Fiserv, and then show by example that it can be done. Because I think, before the 2-minute mile was broken, right? People thought it would never be broken, right? But once it was, now the record just keeps.
A bunch of people keep
right.
going.
So once you can demonstrate that it's possible, others can believe and then start doing it as well.
Got it. Really, they broke the 2-minute mile? Oh man. But anyways, just kidding. Let's talk about a slightly different dimension, right? Like what we notice at Yugabyte, and I'm sure this happens in the world in general, is these design patterns you talk about, they evolve, right? Like as you go into a cloud native world or a digital native world, For example, sometimes you have to build applications scrappily, see if it succeeds, and then double down on the applications. But you can't build it too scrappily because you want to evolve it if it succeeds. If it doesn't succeed, fine, you can just sunset it, but you have to keep experimenting, right? So this notion of experimentation, or the design pattern of building relatively quickly with existing infrastructure, even if you go down one level deeper into the infrastructure, you might want more and more building blocks automated away as a DBaaS, or as the platform layer, as you called it. How do you keep developers abreast of how these things happen? That's on one side. And if they discover a pattern, how do they influence the rest of the platform, the rest of the people, and the organization to be able to leverage? So it's basically the same question in two different sides of the coin.
No, I think I get it. So one of the things we invested in over the last year, and that I was responsible for building, is what we call Dev Studio. So it's a single developer portal across all of Fiserv. Now that sounds pretty obvious, but before we built that, we had, we have thousands of products that are API enabled, and each of them has how many, hundreds, let's say, of endpoints. So,
yeah.
And then there was different developer portals with different capabilities, different credentials, and things like that. So we decided to build, one single portal,
Yeah.
both for internal Fiserv employees as well as for third parties that integrate with us. So.
Yeah.
So that's going to be our primary, communication vehicle, both to our clients as well as internally.
It's almost like that intellect as code thing where you can
exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. So that's going to be the go-to place where I envision a day where developers, both internal and external of Fiserv, are going to have basically two windows open. One is going to be a browser on Dev Studio, and the other one is going to be their favorite IDE. Right?
Fantastic. Yeah. I think a lot of the enhancements that we end up putting inside our own cloud product are pretty similar, right? I think you've played with it mostly, like cloud. Everything, just try to get more done with the browser and just have minimal dependencies elsewhere.
Yeah.
So, all right, fantastic. Okay, so let's talk about the business impact of something like distributed SQL, right? Like, can you contrast the world when you were building apps against a single traditional database versus when you're adopting distributed SQL? What is the value that you see on the business side, and then we can talk about the value on the developer side.
I think that there's two main. One obviously is the economics, right? I think that's a clear one, right? Yeah. But I think the second one is, being that we're in such a regulated environment, we have huge requirements for data residency concerns, having high availability, having multiple locations, nearly instantaneous replication across those, and we're 24/7, and pick a day like when we're doing 4,000 card swipes per second.
Yep.
We have a meeting on Monday mornings, and it's a meeting you do not want to be in.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay, because you have to explain why something went down, and even if it's 5 minutes, it could have drastic impact.
Yeah.
So I think what's really critical is that we can distribute geographically or across clouds or on-prem and on cloud, and I think that gives us the ability to sleep better at night. So I would say those are
makes sense. Yeah, it makes total sense. And I think essentially one way or the other it comes down to being resilient and available irrespective of what comes your way, right? Like from the business perspective. Now, distributed SQL database, they build this aspect into the database, right? So how does that help the developer in your opinion? How do you see that play out?
As a developer, I see a connection string.
You don't care.
Right. I should not care, right?
Yeah.
And I shouldn't care about my container management system. I shouldn't care about the public cloud that's sitting underneath it, right?
Yeah.
So if we get that all right, the developer really might not even need a connection string, right?
Yeah, that's right. It's solved, automated.
It's already solved, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we have to get to. And then, but then there are people whose job is to care very much about those other platforms.
Absolutely,
but that's, it's kind of like the old, that's not old school, but how we were classically trained in computer science is to build layers.
Layers, and
right?
Yeah.
So now it's layers of platforms, not just layers of code, right?
Yeah.
So it's platforms on platforms on platforms. And if you don't pick the right platform, I guess you're as weak as your weakest platform.
That's right.
Right?
That's
so a lot of choices out there. We're really thrilled with the direction that Yugabyte is going in. And, I think I'm fair to say that I'm going to be able to sleep at night.
Awesome. Fantastic. So, like, one of the things that we have done a lot right from the beginning is to be very compatible with something like Postgres, right? Like, so it just works and behaves like a database, How important is that, in your opinion, from your perspective, whatever it is that you see from your seat?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very, very important. And I'll tell you, I'll give you a little example that we just had a set of college interns, comp sci students, probably they were like sophomores, I think. And we threw a little toy problem at them, something that I hope to build into a product. And I told them, and you're going to use as your repository Yugabyte.
Okay.
And they said, I don't know what that is.
Okay.
So I said, Google it.
Okay.
And within a few days, they were up and running on it.
Fantastic.
Right.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's also, I think, an overlooked portion of developer productivity is the familiarity, right?
Yeah.
So, but talking about familiarity, let's talk about the cultural aspect that you mentioned, right? Like, what are the cultural changes that are needed in order to operate in this tip of the spear model that your team does?
So I would say,
I
would say that first of all, you have to be not afraid to fail.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the way I always explain things is, well, there's a couple pieces I can answer. So one thing that I learned from my boss is to write a press release before you start a project.
Yeah.
Right. And what's important, right, with the press releases has a date on it, so you're making a date commitment.
Yeah.
And then you have a few sentences of what you're going to deliver.
Yeah.
And then, hopefully that would be the press release you would theoretically, but you really don't.
Yeah, of course, it changes, but yes.
Yeah. So that's one thing. And then that's really good for transparency, and it gives confidence to the higher-ups that, we're getting our job done and we're getting done what we've committed to do and on time and with excellence. The other thing I always say is I always want to have a stake in the ground to which we're going to run as fast as we can, unless and until we get some additional information, and then we'll move the stake. Right.
Yep.
So
Yep.
very much the classic, cycling of an agile 2-week kind of scrum, and sometimes we get that stake in exactly the right place. I had an example where we were building an app for financial crimes.
Okay.
And I gave my team 3 sprints, so 6 weeks, probably about 8 developers. I wanted to see an early kind of version of what this might look like because I wanted to get out in front of a client.
Yeah.
So the product team, it was a separate product team at the time, was like, no, we're not doing it. That's ridiculous. I mean, it barely does anything.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, this is how you do it. This is how
That's
it
how
should
you
be
do
done.
it. Yes.
So
yes.
we take it to this client, a bank, right? And we carefully said that this isn't even in beta. This is just in the lab. This is just something
code. Yeah,
we're
it's
thinking,
freshly written code. Yeah.
Right. And we showed it to them, and they said, "We want to buy it." I'm like, wow, that was fantastic.
That's validation.
That's a case where we had the stake in the ground, right? It doesn't always happen like that, but I think that's one of the key things about having that mindset of really embracing the unknown.
Yep.
I'll tell you another anecdotal story that happened to me. When I first came to First Data many years ago, I brought in the Agile methodology, and I think I was probably the first one in that organization to execute on it. Okay.
Fantastic.
So when I get there, the other people who are already there, kind of the senior managers, are like, Agile, yeah, I love it.
It was a term. It was a thing. It was like DevOps. It's the cloud. It's
right. I got to do it. I'm going to do it too. Right.
Yeah.
So fast forward about 3 months later, I'm on a pretty senior call, and one of my peers calls me out and says, I'm reckless.
Okay.
And I said, wow.
That's called agile. But
I don't know. I said, I've been called a lot of things. I've been called, what's reckless? And this person said, you're writing code without knowing all the requirements. So I gave a nice pregnant pause, and I said, you've been writing code all along without knowing the requirements. All you did is convinced each other in the conference room that you did, right? You don't know the requirements till you go talk to the customers.
That's right.
So anyway,
That's right.
So that's where kind of the mindset and the cultural change and inertia, I think is one of the most powerful forces in the universe. So those are really hard things to.
Those are tough. Yeah. Okay, so let's maybe we got maybe a couple of minutes, right? So would like to get your thoughts about the future. So where do you see, like, for example, some topics like public cloud? Where do you see Fiserv and yourself with respect to public cloud and its adoption and its value and all of that? Where do you see yourself there? Where do you see yourself with, like, for example, Edge is another thing that's happening. Is there anything going on there? And maybe, and then I can ask you about distributed SQL specifically, but yeah, just where do you see yourself with some of these secular trends?
Yeah, so in terms of public cloud, admittedly, we're a little bit behind the curve. We have a lot of legacy products that are, we're basically we have inventoried them, and now we're trying to prioritize. And we're kind of in a loop where I think a lot of companies is how do you pick the right
apps,
priority, the right apps? What's the right app?
Yeah.
Some might say it's financially driven.
Yeah.
Others might say it's a certain code stack,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
Others might say it's
risk mitigation.
Right, risk. So we're coming up with different classes of apps. Certainly, we're not going to start with our core,
of course,
authorization platforms yet. But everything that my team builds is cloud native, cloud first, API first, and we are very much committed to moving to as much as we can that makes sense to the public cloud. So we're currently, I think we're basically on all of them right now. So
fantastic.
we'll see where we end up, but we're definitely committed to public cloud.
Fantastic, yeah, that's awesome. And I think a lot of the value that we're building for at Yugabyte DB in distributed SQL is to help those type of applications move to the cloud, right? But any thoughts on distributed SQL, or specifically from us, from Yugabyte, anything that we could do to help, or what you think would be exciting to build, what you look forward to?
How about I give you a problem that I don't know how to solve?
Sure, yeah.
And maybe
sure.
you tell me if you can help me solve.
All right.
Because I really don't know. So we have a bunch of legacy applications that we still sell, but they were written before multi-tenancy was a concept.
Thing,
right?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So every time we have a new client, we basically have to copy and paste the code and the database, right? So they each just talk to basically a local database.
Yeah.
Very, very painful. We can imagine what the maintenance is like for all that and cost and all that.
Like a schema change is like a nightmare. Yeah.
Nightmare. So, is there some way that we can leverage Yugabyte and kind of coalesce or combine all those individual instances without having to rewrite so much of the code?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now, I know it's kind of a loaded question because it really depends on how well the data layer was abstracted. But that would be something that would be great that maybe we could look at.
Yeah, actually, this is one of the exciting things on our roadmap anyway. It just actually genuinely happens to be, because there's multiple levels of multi-tenancy that come up. There's the level where you want to consolidate a bunch of different applications, but these may be the applications that haven't yet taken off, right? They're still baking, or they may have past their prime and you still want to maintain them. And then there's applications that you want to run by themselves, right? So for the applications that you want operational efficiency over, because they're not really prime time, there's a lot of them, but they're needed, but you can't get rid of them, but you still have to run them. So we're looking at how can we deliver that type of operational efficiency, because fundamentally Yugabyte DB as a distributed SQL database is a scale-based thing, right? It can do scale, it can do resilience, but the scale dimension can be the number of databases, not just the size of any one database, right? So that's that dimension. But we have talked about this notion where all of the databases are kind of linked in their schema, and so it's different tenants that you're catering to. So this is actually, I think, in part multi-tenancy, but in part what we call dynamic workload optimization, where you may have some tenants that grow very big and you want to scale them out, and inside that cluster, multi-tenant cluster, but other tenants which are very small that you want to keep them packed, you want the opposite of scale, so we're starting to see more and more of this pattern. So this is something we're starting to partner with, so would love to work with you on that. But this is in the future of distributed SQL, I believe.
Great.
Yeah,
well, we are a target-rich environment for something like that.
Fantastic.
So
fantastic. Yeah, we should talk about that. But anything else? Any closing thoughts? Anything else? Like it's been fantastic, actually, and I've learned a few things here. But it's been fantastic. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think so. I was at the VMware conference this week and was looking at one of their new products. Well, it's not new. It's the new version of Tanzu, and they're really embracing this concept of patterns, right?
Fantastic.
And you can roll your own. And I noticed that on your roadmap, you're going to have a similar kind of concept with this.
Yep.
So I'm really interested in how we can bring those together.
Yep.
And then the developer experience would be they go into Developer Studio, they say, I need to build this kind of app, and they get everything that they need kind of from the app runtime and security, along with all the database stuff, and hopefully in a way that they can't do much wrong.
That's
Right.
fantastic. That's a great idea. Yeah, just extend around the blueprint rather than
exactly.
reinvent the whole thing. Yeah. Awesome. Fantastic. It's been great, Tom, having you here. Really appreciate your time. Really insightful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah.